They say a man can wait a lifetime for a promise to come true. But most men don't have the kind of patience that turns years into decades, that turns hope into something harder than faith. Most men would have given up after the first 5 years, maybe 10. They would have told themselves the promise was made by a dying woman who didn't know what she was asking, that circumstances change, that life moves on whether you're ready or not. Alistair Donovan was not most men. For 22 years, he sat on the porch of Copper Ridge Ranch in the Texas Hill Country, watching the dirt road that wound through cedar and mesquite, waiting for a woman he had never met. Every morning he woke before dawn and walked to that porch. Every evening he sat in his rocking chair until the stars came out. And every single day he wrote a letter to the woman he had loved and lost, telling her that he was still waiting, still keeping his word, still believing that the promise made beside her deathbed would one day be fulfilled. People in Cedar Springs thought he was crazy. Some thought he was touched by God. Others thought he was simply a lonely old man who had built a fantasy to fill the empty years. They were all wrong, because on a hot August afternoon in 2018, when the sun hung low and the cicadas sang their last songs of summer, a woman pushed open the cedar gate of Copper Ridge Ranch carrying a battered suitcase and a lifetime of pain, and Alistair Donovan knew in the depths of his failing heart that the wait was finally over. The August sun hung low over the Texas Hill Country, casting long shadows across the dirt road that wound through cedar and mesquite. The air shimmered with heat, thick and still, the kind of afternoon when even the cicadas seemed too tired to sing. At the end of that road, where the land rose gently toward a ridge lined with live oaks, stood a gate made of weathered cedar posts. Above it, burned into a wooden plank by hands long steady but now trembling with age, were the words, Copper Ridge Ranch. Alistair Donovan sat in his usual spot on the porch of the main house, a rocking chair worn smooth by 22 years of waiting. He was 80 years old, tall even when seated, with shoulders that still remembered the strength of youth, though they now curved slightly inward as if protecting something fragile inside his chest. His beard was white as cotton, his face mapped with lines that spoke of hard labor, long silences, and a single unbroken promise. In his lap rested a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and swollen from decades of ink and weather. He held a pen in his right hand, the grip uncertain, his fingers trembling slightly. The tremor had started 6 months ago, around the same time Dr. Calloway had delivered the news in that careful clinical voice doctors use when they know there is nothing left to offer but honesty. Congestive heart failure. Stage 4. 6 months, maybe less. Alistair had refused the aggressive treatments, the medications that might buy him another season, but would leave him too weak to do what needed to be done. He had waited 22 years. He could wait 6 more months. He had to. He dipped the pen and began to write, his handwriting smaller now, less certain than it had been in 1996. August 12th, 2018. Letter number 8030. Dear Iris, today, the sky is the same color it was the day you died. That pale blue that looks like it's been washed too many times. I always wondered if you could see the sky from where you are now. I hope you can. I hope it's a better blue than this one. He paused, the pen hovering above the page. From inside the house came the sounds of Opal Whitfield moving about the kitchen, the clatter of cast iron on the stove, the low hum of her voice as she sang an old hymn. Opal had been with him for 19 years, the first to arrive after he'd bought the ranch and opened the doors to those who had nowhere else to go. She was 78 now, her hands spotted with age, but still strong enough to knead dough to tend the stove, to hold the whole place together. When Alistair's heart gave out in the middle of the night, and he had to sit very still until the pain passed, she knew he was dying. They all did. But no one spoke of it. Not yet. Alistair returned to the letter. I think she's coming soon, Iris. I don't know how I know, but I do. The same way I knew you were gone before Father Miguel called. The same way I knew you loved me even though you married another man. I just know. A sound pulled his attention from the page. The creak of the gate. Slow, deliberate metal on metal singing in the heat. Alistair looked up, his heart suddenly loud in his ears, and saw her. A woman stood at the gate, one hand on the latch, the other gripping the handle of a battered suitcase. She wore jeans and a faded blue shirt, a scarf tied around her dark hair to keep it out of her face. She was slender, almost too thin, and there was a weariness in the way she stood, as if the weight of the suitcase was nothing compared to the weight of everything else she carried. For a moment, Alistair could not breathe. The pen slipped from his fingers and fell to the porch, rolling between the wooden slats and disappearing into the dust below. The woman pushed the gate open and stepped inside. She did not look around with the curiosity of a stranger. She looked like someone who had been walking for a very long time and had finally, against all odds, arrived. Alistair rose from his chair, his knees protesting his heart, hammering so hard he thought it might give out right there. He gripped the porch railing to steady himself. His vision blurred, and for a terrible, beautiful second, he saw not the woman but Iris. Iris at 26, her face pale from illness, her eyes still bright with the fierce love she'd had for the daughter she would never see grow up. Then the moment passed and he saw clearly. She was not Iris, but she had Iris's eyes, Iris's cheekbones, Iris's way of standing with her weight on one hip like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Opal appeared in the doorway behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at Alistair's face and then at the woman in the yard, and she understood. The woman walked slowly across the packed dirt, past the old well with its rusted bucket, past the garden where tomatoes hung heavy on their vines. When she reached the bottom of the porch steps, she stopped. She looked up at Alistair, and her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Alistair descended the steps one at a time, his hand on the railing, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached the ground, he stood before her close enough to see the dust on her clothes, the sunburn on her cheeks, the faint scar above her left eyebrow. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew. He had always known. Her voice was hoarse, dry from the road. "Maeve. Maeve Holloway." Alistair closed his eyes. The world tilted and he felt Opal's hand on his shoulder steadying him. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "Welcome home, child," he said, his voice breaking. "There's always been a place here for you." Maeve's face crumpled just for a second, And then she pulled it back together with the practiced control of someone who had learned not to cry in front of strangers. But Alistair was not a stranger. He had loved her before she was born. Opal stepped forward, her voice warm and steady. "Come inside, honey. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Maeve hesitated, glancing back at the gate, as if considering whether she should run. Then she looked at Alistair again, at the tears streaming down his weathered face, and something in her softened. "Okay," she whispered. "Just for a little while." Alistair watched her climb the steps, Opal's arm around her shoulders, and he sank down onto the bottom step, his legs too weak to hold him. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the erratic thump of his failing heart, and he whispered the words he had been waiting 22 years to say. "Thank you, Iris. Thank you for keeping your word." Inside the house smelled of cornbread and coffee. The kitchen was large and worn, the kind of room that had seen 1,000 meals and 1,000 conversations. A long wooden table dominated the center, scarred and stained from years of use. Mismatched chairs surrounded it, each one a relic from a different life, a different story. Maeve sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that Opal had pressed into them. She drank slowly, savoring the heat, and tried not to look at the faces watching her from the doorway. There were 6 of them, old every one, faces creased with time and hardship, but eyes still sharp, still curious. Opal moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew every inch of the space. She set a plate in front of Maeve, cornbread, butter, a bowl of stew thick with vegetables and beef. Maeve stared at it and her hands began to shake. "Go on, honey," Opal said gently. "Eat." Maeve ate. Not politely, not slowly. She ate like someone who had not seen a hot meal in weeks. And maybe she hadn't. When the plate was empty, Opal refilled it without a word, and Maeve ate that too. Alistair sat at the head of the table watching her. He had not touched his own food. He could not take his eyes off her. When Maeve finally pushed the plate away, she looked up and met his gaze. "Thank you," she said, "for the food, for letting me in. I won't stay long. Just a few days until I figure out where to go next." "You don't have to leave," Alistair said. "You can stay as long as you need." "I don't have money to pay for a room," Maeve said quickly. "But I can work. I can cook, clean, mend things. I know how to take care of animals. I'll earn my keep." Opal smiled. "Child, this isn't a hotel. We don't charge folks for being here. Everyone does what they can, and we all get by." Maeve looked around the table at the faces watching her with a kindness she was not used to. She did not trust it. Kindness always came with conditions. Always. But she was so tired. So very tired. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." Alistair stood his chair scraping against the floor. Opal showed her to the room upstairs, the one with the east window. Opal nodded and led Maeve out of the kitchen. Alistair listened to their footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the floorboards overhead, and then he sank back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. "She's here," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "She's finally here." From the shadows near the stove, Augustus Caldwell stepped forward. Gus was 82, blind since a mining accident in 1975 had taken his sight, but left him with a memory sharper than most men half his age. He moved through the house without hesitation, his hands trailing lightly along the walls, his feet sure on the worn floors. "That her, Al?" Gus asked, his voice gravelly. "That's her," Alistair said. "She got Iris's voice," Gus said. "Heard it the second she spoke. Same softness, same sadness underneath." Alistair nodded, though Gus could not see it. "She doesn't know who I am yet. Doesn't know why she's here. You gonna tell her?" "Not tonight. Let her rest first. Let her settle." Gus grunted. "You waited 22 years, Al. Another day won't kill you." Alistair laughed a short, bitter sound. "Won't it?" Gus did not answer. The room Opal gave Maeve was small but clean. A single bed with a quilt stitched in shades of blue and white. A dresser with a cracked mirror. A window that looked out over the fields, where the last light of day painted the grass gold and amber. Maeve set her suitcase on the bed and stood in the center of the room listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Voices downstairs low and murmuring. The creak of the porch as someone rocked in a chair. The distant lowing of cattle. She had not felt safe in a very long time. But here in this small room with its worn furniture and clean sheets, she felt something close to it. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her suitcase. Inside were her few belongings. 2 changes of clothes, a Bible her mother had given her when she was 12, a photograph of Iris holding baby Maeve on the steps of a house Maeve barely remembered. She took out the photograph and stared at it. Iris was young in the picture, maybe 21 or 22. She was smiling, but there was a tiredness in her eyes, a shadow that even the sunlight could not erase. Maeve did not remember much about her mother. She had been only 6 when Iris died, and the memories that remained were fragmented, fleeting. The smell of lavender soap, the sound of humming in the kitchen, the warmth of Iris's hand on her forehead when she was sick, and then the hospital, the machines, the silence. Maeve set the photograph on the dresser and lay down on the bed, fully clothed. She stared at the ceiling, at the cracks in the plaster, and tried not to think about the last 4 months, about Garrett's absence, about the empty apartment in Tulsa, about the nights she had gone to bed hungry because there was no food and no money to buy it. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she slept without dreaming. Downstairs, Alistair sat on the porch in the dark. The journal was open on his lap, but he had not written anything since Maeve arrived. He did not need to. The letter he had been writing for 22 years was finally over. Behind him, the door opened and Opal stepped out. She sat in the chair beside him, her hands folded in her lap. "She's asleep," Opal said. "Good. You gonna tell her tomorrow?" Alistair shook his head. "Not yet. She's scared. I can see it in her eyes. If I tell her too soon, she'll run. And if you wait too long, then I'll die before she knows." Opal reached over and took his hand. Her grip was firm, steady. "You're not dying yet, Al. You still got work to do." Alistair smiled faintly. "I hope you're right." They sat in silence, listening to the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled long and lonely. The stars came out bright and cold against the black sky. And on the ridge above the ranch where the live oaks grew thick and the wind whispered through the leaves, the past and the present stood side by side waiting. The first week passed in a rhythm that Maeve had almost forgotten existed. She woke before dawn, the sky still gray, and went downstairs to find Opal, already in the kitchen, the stove crackling, the smell of coffee filling the air. Together they made breakfast for the household: eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy. The kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and carried you through a day of hard work. The others came down one by one. Gus first, his hand trailing along the banister, his feet sure despite the darkness. Then Constance Ashford, a woman of 76 who had not spoken a word since a car accident in 1998, had crushed her larynx and stolen her voice. Connie communicated with gestures with a notebook and pen she kept in her apron pocket, and with a smile that could light up the whole room. Fletcher Grady appeared next, a wiry man of 74 with wild white hair and a laugh that sounded like rusty hinges. Fletch had been a comedian once, traveling the small-town circuit with jokes that never quite landed but always made people smile anyway. He still told jokes at breakfast, terrible ones, and Maeve found herself laughing despite herself. Eudora Bramwell came down, last moving slowly, her joints stiff from arthritis. Eudora was 79, a woman who had learned the old ways of healing from her grandmother, who had learned them from hers, all the way back to the hills of Scotland. She kept a small garden behind the house filled with herbs and plants that most people had never heard of, and she brewed teas that could cure a headache, ease a cough, or help you sleep through the night. And then there was Barnaby Holt, 85 years old, a retired judge who had presided over the county courthouse for 30 years before age and failing eyesight had forced him to step down. Barnaby was sharp as ever, though his body had begun to betray him, and he spent most of his days in a chair by the window reading law books through a magnifying glass and muttering about precedents. They were a strange family, bound not by blood but by circumstance, by the simple fact that Alistair Donovan had opened his door and said, "You're welcome here." Maeve learned their routines quickly. After breakfast, she followed Opal to the barn where 6 goats waited to be milked. The first time Maeve tried the goat, kicked the bucket over and bleated indignantly. Opal laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and showed her how to speak softly, how to move gently, how to earn the animal's trust. By the 3rd day, Maeve could milk all 6 goats without spilling a drop. In the afternoons, she worked in the garden with Eudora, pulling weeds, watering the rows of tomatoes and squash and peppers. Eudora did not speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. "Plants know when you care for them," Eudora said one afternoon, her hands deep in the soil. "They grow better for someone who pays attention." Maeve knelt beside her, her hands dirty, her back aching. "I've never been good at keeping things alive." Eudora glanced at her, her pale blue eyes sharp. "You're still alive, aren't you?" Maeve did not know how to answer that. In the evenings after supper, the household gathered in the living room. Fletch told his jokes. Connie knitted her needles, clicking in a steady rhythm. Gus played harmonica, old songs that made Opal hum along. Barnaby read aloud from the newspaper, his voice rising and falling with the cadence of a man who had spent decades addressing courtrooms. And Alistair sat in his chair by the fire watching Maeve. Always watching, she noticed. How could she not? But she did not know what to make of it. He did not speak to her much, did not ask questions or pry into her past. He simply watched with an expression that Maeve could not name. It was not suspicion. It was not pity. It was something softer, something that made her chest ache in a way she did not understand. On the eighth night, Maeve found herself unable to sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around her. Finally, she gave up and went downstairs barefoot, wrapped in a quilt from the bed. The living room was dark. The fire burned down to embers, but the porch light was on, and through the window Maeve saw Alistair sitting in his rocking chair, a blanket over his lap, his eyes closed. She pushed open the door and stepped outside. The night was cool, the air sharp with the scent of cedar and grass. Alistair opened his eyes and looked at her unsurprised. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No. Me neither." Maeve sat on the top step, pulling the quilt tight around her shoulders. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that existed between people who understood that not everything needed to be said aloud. Finally, Maeve broke it. "Why did you let me in?" Alistair rocked slowly, the chair creaking. "Because you needed a place to go. You don't know me." "No," he admitted. "But I knew your mother." Maeve's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" Alistair reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, its edges worn soft from years of handling. He held it out to her. Maeve took it, her hands trembling. The photograph showed a young woman standing beside a man at a county fair. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. The man stood beside her, his hand just barely touching hers, his face lit with a joy so pure it hurt to look at. Maeve recognized the woman immediately. "This is my mother." "Yes." "Who's the man?" Alistair was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's me. 24 years ago." Maeve stared at the photograph, then at Alistair, then back at the photograph. "I don't understand." "I loved your mother," Alistair said simply, "from the first moment I saw her. But she married another man, and I went away. When I came back, she was dying, and she made me promise something." Maeve's throat tightened. "What did she promise you?" "Not to me," Alistair said. "I promised her. I promised I would take care of you if you ever needed me, that I would be here waiting no matter how long it took." Maeve's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the photograph. "You've been waiting for me for 22 years. "Yes." "Why?" Alistair looked at her, and in his eyes Maeve saw a grief so deep it had no bottom. "Because I loved her, and because she asked me to." Maeve stood abruptly, the quilt falling from her shoulders. "I don't believe you. This doesn't make sense. Why would she ask you to take care of me? Why not my father? Why not—" "Your father was a good man," Alistair interrupted gently. "But he was broken. Your mother knew that. She wanted to make sure you had someone just in case." Maeve shook her head, backing toward the door. No, this is crazy. I can't." She turned and fled into the house, the screen door slamming behind her. Alistair sat in his chair, his heart aching, and listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of her door closing. He bent and picked up the quilt she had dropped, folding it carefully. Then he looked up at the stars and whispered, "I tried, Iris. I tried." The next morning, Maeve did not come down for breakfast. Opal brought a tray to her room and found her sitting on the bed, staring at the photograph Alistair had given her. "He tell you?" Opal asked, setting the tray on the dresser. Maeve nodded, not looking up. Opal sat beside her on the bed. "It's true, honey. Every word." "How do you know?" "Because I was here the day he came back from Alaska. I was here when he bought this place. And I was here when he told me he was waiting for someone. He never said who. Just that he'd know her when she came." Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. "Did he know my mother well?" "He loved her," Opal said. "More than I've ever seen a man love a woman. But she was already married when he met her, or maybe she wasn't. I don't know the whole story. What I do know is that he's been waiting for you since before you could walk. And now you're here." Maeve looked at Opal, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do." Opal took her hand. "You don't have to do anything, child. Just stay. Just let him tell you the rest." That afternoon, Alistair found Maeve in the barn brushing down one of the goats. She did not look up when he entered, but she did not run either. He stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry if I frightened you last night." "You didn't frighten me," Maeve said. "You confused me." "I know." "Tell me the rest," she said. "Tell me everything." So he did. He told her about the autumn fair in 1994, when he had seen Iris for the first time. She had been standing by the Ferris wheel laughing at something her friend had said, and the sunlight had caught in her hair and turned it to gold. Alistair had been 26, a ranch hand with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle, and he had fallen in love in the space of a single breath. He told her how he had worked up the courage to ask Iris to dance, and how she had said yes, and how they had spent the whole evening talking about everything and nothing. How he had walked her home and how he had kissed her goodnight on the porch of her father's house. He told her how he had gone to her father, Solomon Holloway, a blacksmith with a reputation for hard work and harder opinions, and asked for permission to court Iris. And how Solomon had looked him up and down and said, "You got nothing, boy. No land, no money, no future. My daughter deserves better." He told her how Iris had cried when Alistair told her what her father had said. How she had begged him to wait to give her time to change Solomon's mind. But before she could, Raymond Holloway had come along. Raymond, who owned a house and a truck and a steady job driving freight across 3 states. Iris married Raymond in the spring of 1995. Alistair was not invited to the wedding. He told Maeve how he had left Texas that summer, heartbroken and desperate, and gone to Alaska to work in the mines. How he had spent 8 years in the cold and the dark, saving every penny, determined to come back with enough money to prove Solomon wrong. And he told her how in 1996 he had received a letter from Father Miguel, the priest at the church in Cedar Springs. The letter was brief. "Iris is dying. She's asking for you." Alistair had taken the first flight south. He arrived in Cedar Springs on a Tuesday in late November. The air was cold, the sky gray. He went straight to the hospital where Iris lay in a bed. Too big for her wasted frame, her skin pale, her eyes sunken. But when she saw him, she smiled. They talked for hours. Iris told him about her marriage, about Raymond's drinking, about the loneliness that had settled over her like a fog. She told him about Maeve, her beautiful daughter, the only good thing to come from 6 years of unhappiness. And then, as the sun set and the room grew dark, Iris took Alistair's hand and said, "I need you to promise me something." anything, Alistair said. If something happens to Maeve, if Raymond can't take care of her, or if she loses her way, I need you to be there. I need you to protect her. Promise me, Al. Promise me you'll wait for her. Alistair had promised, and 3 days later, Iris was gone. Maeve listened to all of this in silence, her hands gripping the brush so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Alistair finished, she set the brush down and turned to face him. My father died when I was 9, she said. He drove his truck off a cliff. The police said it was an accident, but my aunt always thought he did it on purpose. Alistair nodded slowly. I heard. I'm sorry. After he died, I went to live with my Aunt Martina. She was my mother's sister. She wasn't kind. I know. Maeve's eyes flashed. How do you know? Because I tried to see you, Alistair said. Twice. Once when you were 10, and again when you were 14. Both times Martina sent me away. She said I had no right to you, that I was a stranger. Maeve's breath caught. You came to see me. I did. But I didn't push. I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't have the right. So you just waited, Maeve said, her voice rising. You just sat here for 22 years waiting for me to show up. Yes. That's insane. Maybe, Alistair admitted. But I made a promise, and I keep my promises. Maeve turned away, her chest heaving. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she also wanted to stay. She wanted to understand. Why didn't my mother tell me about you? She asked finally. Because she loved you, Alistair said, and she didn't want you to grow up thinking your father wasn't enough. She wanted you to have a normal childhood, even if it wasn't a happy one. It wasn't, Maeve said bitterly. It wasn't normal, and it wasn't happy. I know, Alistair said, and I'm sorry I couldn't change that. But you're here now, and I can help you now. Maeve turned to look at him, her eyes red. Help me how? Alistair reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cedar box, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. He held it out to her. Your mother left this for you, he said. She asked me to keep it safe until you were ready. Maeve stared at the box, her heart pounding. Slowly, she reached out and took it. It was heavier than she expected. Open it, Alistair said gently. Maeve sat down on a bale of hay, the box in her lap. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded blue cloth, was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. Beneath the letters was a small jewelry box, and beneath that, a folded document with an official seal. Maeve picked up the letters first. There were 5 of them, each one addressed in her mother's handwriting. To Maeve on her 18th birthday. To Maeve on her 21st birthday. To Maeve on her 25th birthday. To Maeve on her 30th birthday. To Maeve when she becomes a mother. Maeve's hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the letters. She looked up at Alistair, her eyes brimming with tears. She wrote to me. She did, Alistair said. She wrote them in the weeks before she died. She wanted to make sure you knew how much she loved you, even if she couldn't be there to say it. Maeve set the letters aside and picked up the jewelry box. Inside was a ring, simple and gold, with a small diamond set in the center. It was not expensive, not flashy, but It was beautiful. That was supposed to be her engagement ring, Alistair said quietly. I bought it in 1995 before I knew she was going to marry Raymond. I never gave it to her. But she wanted you to have it. Maeve slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Finally, she unfolded the document. It was a deed dated 1994 for a property at 132 Oak Street in Cedar Springs, Texas. The owner's name was Iris Holloway. Maeve looked up at Alistair, confused. What is this? It's your house, Alistair said. Your mother inherited it from her father Solomon before she married Raymond. She never transferred the title. It's been in your name since you turned 18. I've been paying the taxes all these years waiting for you to come claim it. Maeve's vision blurred. She tried to speak, but no words came. She clutched the deed to her chest and wept great shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. Alistair knelt beside her, his old knees protesting, and wrapped his arms around her. You're not alone, Maeve, he whispered. You were never alone. Your mother made sure of that. And for the first time in her life, Maeve believed it. September arrived with cooler mornings and the first hint of autumn in the air. The leaves on the live oaks had not yet turned, but there was a crispness to the dawn that spoke of change coming, of seasons shifting, whether you were ready or not. Maeve had been at Copper Ridge Ranch for 3 weeks, and in that time something inside her had begun to thaw. She no longer woke in the middle of the night, with her heart racing, listening for footsteps in the hall that never came. She no longer flinched when Alistair spoke to her. She had read the first letter from her mother, the one meant for her 18th birthday, and she had cried for 2 days straight. But they were good tears, cleansing tears, the kind that washed away years of loneliness and left something clean beneath. The house on Oak Street had become her project. It was a small craftsman bungalow built in the 1920s with a sagging porch and windows that rattled in their frames. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling, but the bones were good. Alistair had offered to hire someone to fix it up, but Maeve had refused. I need to do this myself, she had told him. I need to build something with my own hands. He had understood. He always seemed to understand. So every morning after breakfast, Maeve walked the mile from the ranch to Oak Street, carrying tools borrowed from Alistair's workshop. And every morning she found Silas Thorne already there, his truck parked in the driveway, his tool belt slung low on his hips. Silas was the veterinarian for the county, a quiet man of 35 with dark hair that fell across his forehead and hands scarred from years of working with animals that did not always want to be helped. He had lost his wife 3 years ago in a car accident. An accident he had caused by falling asleep at the wheel after a 36-hour shift delivering calves. He had walked away with a broken collarbone. Sarah had not walked away at all. He did not talk about it. But Maeve saw it in his eyes, the same haunted look she saw in her own reflection. The look of someone carrying a weight they could never put down. Silas had started showing up at Oak Street a week after Maeve began working on the house. He had not asked permission. He had simply arrived one morning with a ladder and a box of nails and started repairing the porch steps. You don't have to do this, Maeve had said. I know, Silas replied, but I'm going to anyway. And that had been that. They worked in companionable silence. Most days, the only sounds the rasp of sandpaper on wood. The creak of old floorboards, the distant call of crows in the trees. Occasionally, Silas's daughter Wren would come with him, a small girl of 7 with her mother's blonde hair and her father's serious eyes. Wren was shy, but she took to Maeve immediately, following her around the house and asking questions about everything. "Why is the paint all crackly?" Wren asked one afternoon, running her finger along the peeling windowsill. "Because it's old," Maeve said. "When paint gets old, it dries out and starts to crack. Like people—" Maeve paused, paintbrush in hand, and looked at the girl. "Yeah, like people." Wren nodded solemnly as if this confirmed something she had long suspected. By mid-September, the house was beginning to take shape. The porch was solid. The windows no longer rattled, and Maeve had scraped away most of the old paint in preparation for a fresh coat. She stood in the front yard one evening, hands on her hips surveying her work, and felt something she had not felt in years: pride. "Looks good," a voice said behind her. Maeve turned to find Alistair standing at the edge of the yard, leaning heavily on his cane. He had been spending more time in bed lately, his face pale, his breathing labored. But he had insisted on walking to Oak Street to see the progress. "You shouldn't be out here," Maeve said, hurrying over to him. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 22 years, Alistair said with a faint smile. "I think I've earned the right to take a walk." Maeve took his arm and helped him up the steps to the porch. They sat together on the newly repaired swing, rocking gently, watching the sun sink below the roofline of the house across the street. "Your mother would be proud of you," Alistair said after a while. Maeve felt her throat tighten. "You think so?" "I know so." They sat in silence, and Maeve felt the weight of the question she had been carrying for days pressing against her ribs. "Al," she said quietly, "what happens to the ranch when you're gone?" Alistair did not answer right away. He stared out at the street, at the long shadows stretching across the pavement. And when he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "The ranch goes to you," he said. "Everything. The land, the house, the livestock. It's all in my will." Maeve's breath caught. "What no? No, you can't do that." "I can and I have." "But the others," Maeve protested. "Opal, Gus, Connie, Fletch, Eudora, Barnaby. They've been with you for years. They deserve it more than I do." "They have a home for as long as they live," Alistair said. "That's written into the will, too. But the ranch itself, the responsibility of keeping it going, that falls to you." "Why me?" Alistair turned to look at her, and in his eyes Maeve saw the truth. "Because you're Iris's daughter. Because I promised her I would take care of you. And because I believe you'll do what I couldn't. You'll turn this place into something bigger than just a home for old folks. You'll make it matter." Maeve felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Alistair said. "You already are." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's something else I need to tell you. The house on Oak Street, it's yours free and clear. But I've been thinking about what you said a few weeks ago about wanting to help other women. Women who are in the same situation you were in." Maeve nodded. "I remember." "I think you should turn Oak Street into a refuge," Alistair said. "A safe place for women who have nowhere else to go. You've got the space, You've got the heart. And with the ranch backing you up, you've got the resources. Maeve stared at him. A refuge. Like the ranch, Alistair said. But for women and children who need to escape bad situations. Abuse, poverty, homelessness. You could give them a place to start over. Maeve's mind raced. She thought of the nights she had spent in the apartment in Tulsa, too afraid to sleep listening for Garrett's footsteps. She thought of the fear, the helplessness, the crushing certainty that there was no way out. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll do it." Alistair smiled, and for a moment he looked 10 years younger. "Good. Then we'll get Barnaby to draw up the papers. Make it official." 3 days later, the first woman arrived. Her name was Hazel Pritchard, and she was 19 years old, with a belly swollen 6 months pregnant, and a bruise the size of a fist on her left cheek. She showed up at Oak Street just after dawn, carrying a garbage bag filled with clothes and shaking so hard she could barely stand. Maeve had been sweeping the porch when she saw the girl coming up the walk. She set the broom aside and went down the steps to meet her. "Can I help you?" Maeve asked gently. Hazel's lip trembled. "Reverend Quinn said you might have a place for me. Just for a little while, until I figure things out." Maeve's chest tightened. She saw herself in this girl, saw the fear and the desperation, and she knew without asking that Hazel had run out of options. "Come inside," Maeve said, taking the garbage bag from Hazel's hands. "You're safe now." Hazel burst into tears. Over the next week, Maeve learned Hazel's story in pieces. The girl's father had kicked her out when she told him she was pregnant. The baby's father was a man named Connor Cade, the son of Lowell Cade, a loan shark who ran half the underground economy in 3 counties. Connor had gotten Hazel drunk at a party and forced himself on her. And when Hazel had tried to report it, Lowell had sent 2 men to her house to threaten her family into silence. Hazel had nowhere to go, no money, no friends who would take her in. So she had walked 12 miles to Cedar Springs following the directions Reverend Quinn had scrawled on a napkin, and prayed that the stranger at Oak Street would not turn her away. Maeve did not turn her away. She gave Hazel the upstairs bedroom, helped her wash the clothes in the garbage bag, and made her a meal of soup and bread. That Hazel ate in silence, tears streaming down her face. That night, Maeve sat on the porch and stared up at the stars, her mind churning. She thought about Connor Cade, about the men like him who took what they wanted and left wreckage in their wake. She thought about Garrett, who had done the same to her in a different way. And she thought about Lowell Cade, the man who held the strings, who controlled the fear. She did not know it yet, but Lowell Cade was already watching her. October came cold and wet. The first rains sweeping down from the north and turning the roads to mud. Maeve had settled into a routine. Mornings at the ranch helping Opal with breakfast and chores. Afternoons at Oak Street working on the house and caring for Hazel. Evenings back at the ranch sitting with Alistair on the porch, while he told her stories about her mother. Alistair was fading. Anyone could see it. He slept more, ate less, and the color had drained from his face until he looked like a man carved from wax. But he refused to go to the hospital. Refused to let Dr. Calloway run more tests. "I know what's wrong with me," he told Maeve one night, "and there's nothing they can do to fix it. So I'd rather spend what time I have left here with you." Maeve did not argue. She simply held his hand and listened while he talked. He told her about Alaska, about the years he had spent in the mines. He told her about the men he had worked with. Hard men with rough hands and rougher lives. He told her about the accident in 1998, when a tunnel had collapsed and trapped 6 men underground. Alistair had been one of the lucky ones. He had only been buried for an hour before the rescue team dug him out. But his friend, a man named Jack McAllister, had not been so lucky. Jack had been pinned under a beam, his legs crushed, and he would have died if Alistair had not stayed with him, holding the beam up with his bare hands until help arrived. Jack had survived. And when he sold his share of the mining company 6 years later for $12 million, he had given Alistair 20% as a thank you. "That's how I bought the ranch," Alistair said. "With blood money, you could say. Money earned by nearly dying in the dark." Maeve squeezed his hand. "You saved his life." "Maybe," Alistair said. "Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable. Jack died 5 years ago. Heart attack. All that money didn't buy him a single extra day." "But it bought you this place," Maeve said. "It bought you the chance to keep your promise." Alistair smiled faintly. "I suppose it did." On a Tuesday in late October, Maeve was alone at Oak Street, painting the kitchen when she heard the front door open. She set down her brush and went into the hallway expecting to see Hazel, who had gone into town to see the midwife. Instead, she found a man standing in the living room. He was tall, lean, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He wore a suit that was too expensive for Cedar Springs, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Maeve's stomach dropped. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her chest. The man's smile widened. "You must be Maeve Holloway. I've heard a lot about you. Who are you?" "My name is Lowell Cade," the man said, "and I think we need to have a conversation." Maeve's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced toward the door, calculating the distance, wondering if she could run. Lowell followed her gaze and chuckled. "Relax, Mrs. Holloway. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to talk business. I don't have any business with you." "Oh, but you do," Lowell said. He walked slowly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back, inspecting the freshly painted walls, the new curtains, the scuffed but clean floors. "You're harboring a girl named Hazel Pritchard, a girl who is carrying my grandson." Maeve's blood ran cold. "She's under my protection." "Protection," Lowell repeated as if tasting the word. "That's a strong word, Mrs. Holloway. Protection implies you have the power to keep her safe." "Do you?" Maeve lifted her chin. "Yes." Lowell stopped walking and turned to face her. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Let me explain something to you. My son made a mistake. A stupid, reckless mistake. But that baby Hazel is carrying is still a Cade. And I don't let my blood grow up in squalor raised by some runaway girl in a broken-down house. Hazel is staying here," Maeve said, "and you can't do anything about it." Lowell stepped closer, close enough that Maeve could smell the cologne he wore, expensive and cloying. "I could do a lot of things, Mrs. Holloway. I could have this house condemned. I could make sure the bank forecloses on any loans you take out. I could make life very, very difficult for you." "Then why haven't you?" Maeve asked, her voice shaking. Lowell smiled again. Because I'm a reasonable man. I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. Send Hazel back to her family. Let us take care of the baby. And I'll forget this little refuge of yours ever existed. No. Lowell's eyes hardened. Think carefully, Mrs. Holloway. You're new to this town. You don't know how things work here, but I do. And I promise you, if you make an enemy of me, you will regret it. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and looked back at her. You have until the end of the week to change your mind. After that, I can't guarantee Hazel's safety. Or yours. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Maeve stood in the middle of the living room, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. She sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands, trying to breathe, trying to think. She did not hear Silas come in until he was standing in front of her. "Maeve," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "What happened?" She looked up and the tears she had been holding back spilled over. "Lowell Cade was here. He threatened me. He threatened Hazel." Silas's jaw tightened. He sat beside her, close but not touching, and his presence was steady grounding. What did he say? Maeve told him everything. When she finished, Silas was silent for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "You need to call the sheriff," he said finally, "and tell him what that Lowell threatened me. He didn't do anything illegal. He just made it clear what would happen if I didn't do what he wanted." "Then you need to protect yourself," Silas said. "And Hazel." "How?" Silas looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. You're not alone in this, Maeve." Maeve felt something crack open inside her chest. She wanted to believe him, but every person she had ever relied on had left her one way or another. Her mother, her father, Garrett. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas was quiet for the moment. Then he said, "Because I know what it's like to lose someone because you weren't strong enough to save them. And I'm not going to let that happen again." Maeve reached out and took his hand, and Silas squeezed back. They sat like that until Hazel came home, and then Silas helped Maeve explain what had happened. And together, they made a plan. That night, Maeve returned to the ranch and found Alistair waiting for her on the porch. He took one look at her face and said, "Tell me." So she did. When she finished, Alistair was silent. He rocked in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes distant. "Lowell Cade is a dangerous man," he said finally, "but he's not invincible. Barnaby knows people. Lawyers, judges, law enforcement. We'll make some calls. See what we can do." "What if it's not enough?" Maeve asked. Alistair looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a fierceness she had not seen before. "Then we fight. And we don't stop fighting until you and Hazel are safe." Maeve nodded, but the fear did not leave her. The week passed in a blur of tension and waiting. Barnaby made calls, contacted old colleagues, tried to build a case against Lowell Cade. But the more he dug, the clearer it became that Lowell had spent years insulating himself from legal trouble. He operated through intermediaries, used shell companies, and kept his hands clean. "He's untouchable," Barnaby admitted one evening, his voice heavy with frustration. "I'm sorry, Maeve. I thought I could help, but the system is rigged in his favor." Maeve felt the last thread of hope snap. "So what do I do?" "You keep Hazel close," Barnaby said, "and you don't let Lowell intimidate you." But intimidation was the least of Maeve's worries. On a cold Friday night in early November, Maeve woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and listened. The sound had come from downstairs. She grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand and crept to the door, opening it slowly. The hallway was dark, silent. She moved toward the stairs, her bare feet soundless on the wood floor. Downstairs, she heard movement, footsteps, the creak of a door. Maeve descended the stairs one step at a time, her pulse roaring in her ears. When she reached the bottom, she shone the flashlight into the living room. A man stood by the window, his back to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. In his hand was a crowbar. Maeve's breath caught. "Who are you?" The man turned and Maeve's world tilted. It was Garrett. He looked thinner than she remembered his face, gaunt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. But it was him, her husband, the man who had left her with nothing. "Maeve," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Maeve could not speak. She could not move. She simply stood there, staring at the ghost of the man she had once loved. Garrett took a step toward her, his hands raised. "I know you don't want to see me. I know I don't deserve to be here. But I need your help." "Get out," Maeve said, her voice shaking. "Maeve, please, just listen." "Get out," she screamed. Garrett flinched. "I owe Lowell Cade $50,000. If I don't pay him by the end of the month, he's going to kill me." Maeve's stomach turned. "That's not my problem." "It's not just me," Garrett said desperately. "My father borrowed the money years ago. He died before he could pay it back. And now Lowell is coming after me for the debt. I didn't know, Maeve. I swear I didn't know, until it was too late." "You left me," Maeve said, her voice breaking. "You stole my money. You sold my mother's ring. And now you want me to save you." Garrett's face crumpled. I know I'm a bastard. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I'm begging you, Maeve. Please. I don't want to die." Maeve felt something shift inside her. She looked at Garrett, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had hurt her, but a broken, terrified boy who had made choices he could not take back. And she thought of her mother's letters, the one she had read just last week, meant for her 25th birthday. "Compassion is not weakness, my darling girl, but neither is it foolishness. Help those who deserve it. Protect yourself from those who don't." "I can't help you," Maeve said quietly. "I'm sorry, Garrett, but I can't." Garrett sank to his knees, his face in his hands. "Then I'm dead." Maeve turned and walked back upstairs, her legs shaking, her heart breaking. Behind her, Garrett wept. The next morning, Maeve told Alistair what had happened. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I'll give him the money." Maeve stared at him. What? $50,000, Alistair said. I'll give it to Garrett, on one condition. No, Maeve said. Absolutely not. He doesn't deserve your help. Maybe not, Alistair said. But you do. And if Garrett dies, Lowell will come after you next. This way we buy time. We buy safety. What's the condition? Maeve asked, her voice tight. He signs divorce papers, Alistair said. He gives up any claim to you, to Oak Street, to everything. And he works at the ranch for 2 years to pay back the loan. Maeve shook her head. He'll never agree to that. Then he can take his chances with Lowell, Alistair said. 3 days later, Garrett came to the ranch. He looked worse than before, his clothes dirty, his face bruised. He sat across from Alistair at the kitchen table, and Barnaby laid out the contract. Garrett read it slowly, his hands trembling. Then he picked up the pen and signed. Alistair counted out $50,000 in cash bills wrapped in neat bundles. He pushed them across the table. This is a loan, not a gift. You work it off or you answer to me. Understood? Garrett nodded, his eyes wet. Thank you. Thank you. He left with the money that afternoon, and Maeve watched him go with a hollow feeling in her chest. You did a good thing, Silas said, standing beside her on the porch. Did I? Maeve asked. Yes. But 2 days later, Garrett was gone. He did not show up for his first day of work at the ranch. He did not call, did not leave a note. He simply vanished, taking the $50,000 with him. And on New Year's Eve, Lowell Cade sent a message. The barn at Copper Ridge Ranch burned to the ground just after midnight. The flames were visible for miles, a tower of orange and red that turned the night sky into day. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but smoking timbers and ash. Gus had been inside trying to move the goats to safety. He collapsed from smoke inhalation and was rushed to the hospital, where he remained unconscious for 2 days. Alistair had another heart attack that same night. Opal found him on the porch, clutching his chest, his face gray. The paramedics got him to the hospital just in time, but the damage was done. Maeve sat beside his bed in the ICU, holding his hand, and whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Alistair's eyes fluttered open. Not your fault, he rasped. I should have said no, Maeve said. I should have let Garrett face the consequences. You showed compassion, Alistair said. That's not wrong, but now you know. Compassion without wisdom is just weakness. Maeve nodded, tears streaming down her face. Alistair squeezed her hand, his grip weak. Listen to me, Maeve. I don't have much time left. Days, maybe. So I need you to hear this. You are stronger than you think. You are braver than you know. And you are going to finish what I started. Do you understand? I understand, Maeve whispered. Good, Alistair said. He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. Good. Maeve stayed with him through the night. And when the sun rose, she made a decision. She was done being afraid. She was done running. Garrett had made his choice. Lowell had made his. Now it was her turn. She kissed Alistair's forehead and left the hospital. She drove to Oak Street, where Hazel was waiting, and she said, Pack your things. We're going back to the ranch. and we're going to end this." Hazel's eyes widened. "How?" Maeve's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Because she was Iris's daughter, and she was Alistair Donovan's goddaughter, and she was done being a victim. January came to Texas hill country with a bitter cold that settled into the bones and would not leave. The sky was gray for days on end, heavy with clouds that promised snow, but delivered only sleet and freezing rain. The land turned hard as iron, the grass brittle and brown, and the wind that swept down from the north carried with it a sense of finality, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alistair Donovan came home from the hospital on the 8th of January. The doctors had wanted to keep him longer to run more tests to try medications that might buy him another month or two, but Alistair had refused. He knew what was coming, and he wanted to face it on his own terms, in his own place, surrounded by the people he had chosen as family. Opal prepared the downstairs study as a bedroom, moving the desk and bookshelves to make room for a hospital bed that the county health service delivered on a gray Tuesday morning. The bed looked wrong in that room, too sterile, too clinical, a jarring intrusion into a space that had always smelled of leather and pipe tobacco and old paper. But Alistair did not complain. He settled into the bed with a sigh of relief, his body finally allowed to rest after fighting for so long. Maeve sat beside him in a chair she had dragged in from the kitchen, and for the first hours they did not speak. There was nothing that needed to be said. Not yet. Gus had recovered from the smoke inhalation, though his lungs would never be the same. He moved more slowly now. His breathing labored, and he spent most of his days in his room listening to the radio and carving small figures from scraps of wood. He did not speak of the fire, but Maeve saw the way his hands trembled when he held the carving knife, and she knew he was reliving that night over and over in his mind. The insurance company had sent an investigator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who walked through the ruins of the barn with a clipboard and a camera. He took photographs of the charred beams, the melted metal of the roof, the blackened earth where 50 years of hay and tools had been reduced to ash. Arson, he concluded. Accelerant used. Gasoline, most likely. Poured along the base of the walls and ignited from the outside. No witnesses, no evidence pointing to a specific individual. The report went into a file, and the file went into a drawer, and nothing was done. Maeve had expected as much. Lowell Cade was too careful, too experienced, too well protected to leave a trail that could lead back to him. But she also knew with a certainty that lived in her gut, like a stone, that Lowell had given the order. And she knew that the fire was only the beginning. 3 days after Alistair came home, Maeve received a phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar male with the flat affect of someone reading from a script. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Deputy Marshal Vance with the U.S. Marshal Service. I'm calling to inform you that Garrett Finch was apprehended at the Canadian border on January 6th. He's currently being held in federal custody in Montana, pending extradition to Texas." Maeve's hand tightened on the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're listed as his spouse," Deputy Marshal Vance said. "And because there's a matter of $50,000 in cash that was found in his possession. Mr. Finch claims the money was a loan from Alistair Donovan. Can you confirm that?" Maeve closed her eyes. "Yes, it was a loan." "Then you'll need to provide documentation. A contract, a promissory note, something in writing. Otherwise, the money will be seized as potential proceeds from illegal activity." "I'll send you the paperwork." Maeve said. Thank you, ma'am. One more thing. Mr. Finch has requested to speak with you. He's asked us to pass along a message. Maeve's throat tightened. What message? There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. Then Deputy Marshal Vance read in that same flat voice, Tell Maeve I'm sorry. Tell her I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But tell her I'm not the only one she needs to worry about. Lowell Cade is coming for her and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. The line went dead. Maeve set the phone down carefully, her hands shaking. She walked into the study where Alistair lay propped against pillows, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and uneven. They caught Garrett, she said. Alistair opened his eyes. I know. Barnaby called me this morning. He's warning me about Lowell. Of course he is, Alistair said. Because Garrett knows what Lowell is capable of, and he knows that burning the barn was just a warning. Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle him. What do I do, Al? Alistair reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. You fight, but you fight smart. You don't go after Lowell directly. You make him come to you. And when he does, you make sure you're ready. How? Alistair's eyes gleamed with a sharpness that belied his failing body. We call in reinforcements. Barnaby has contacts. People who owe him favors. And there's a lawyer in Austin, a woman named Thaddeus Grimm. She's the best in the state when it comes to men like Lowell. Will she help us? She will if I ask her, Alistair said. Thaddeus and I go back a long way. She knows what I did for her brother when he was in trouble. She'll come. Maeve nodded, but the fear did not leave her. What if it's not enough? Alistair pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the fragile rise and fall of his chest. Then you do what your mother would have done. You stand your ground. You protect the people who depend on you. And you don't let fear make your decisions. Maeve closed her eyes and let herself believe him. The next day, Thaddeus Grimm arrived at Copper Ridge Ranch in a black sedan that looked like it had driven straight out of a legal thriller. She was a woman in her early 50s, tall and lean with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Maeve's truck. Barnaby met her at the door, and the two of them embraced like old soldiers reuniting after a long campaign. Thaddeus, Barnaby said warmly, it's been too long. Not long enough, you old reprobate, Thaddeus replied. But there was affection in her voice. She turned to Maeve and extended a hand. You must be Maeve Holloway. I've heard a great deal about you. Maeve shook her hand, trying not to be intimidated by the woman's confidence. Thank you for coming. Don't thank me yet, Thaddeus said. I haven't done anything. Let's see what we're dealing with first. They gathered in the living room, all of them. Maeve Alistair propped in a wheelchair that Opal had borrowed from the church, Barnaby, Thaddeus, Silas, and Hazel. Opal brought coffee and cornbread, and they sat around the scarred wooden table like a council of war. Thaddeus opened her briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. All right, let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything, Maeve told her. About Garrett and the debt. About Lowell's visit to Oak Street. About the fire and the $50,000 and the warning Garrett had sent from Montana. Thaddeus listened without interrupting, taking notes in a precise slanted hand. When Maeve finished, Thaddeus set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Lowell Cade, she said, is what we in the legal profession call a professional bastard. He's been operating in this part of Texas for 20 years, and in that time he's built an empire on fear and debt, loan sharking, extortion, intimidation. He's careful, always uses intermediaries, and he's never been convicted of anything more serious than a misdemeanor assault charge that he pled down to disturbing the peace. So he's untouchable, Maeve said flatly. I didn't say that, Thaddeus replied. I said he's careful. But careful men make mistakes when they get arrogant. And from what you've told me, Lowell is feeling very arrogant right now. What kind of mistakes? Silas asked. Thaddeus tapped her pen against the legal pad. The fire, for one. Arson is a felony, and if we can tie it back to him even circumstantially, we can use it. The threats against Hazel are another angle. If we can get her to testify about what Connor Cade did to her, and if we can prove that Lowell tried to cover it up, we have conspiracy to obstruct justice. Hazel's face went pale. I can't testify. He'll kill me. Not if we protect you, Thaddeus said. And not if we move fast enough that he doesn't see it coming. Barnaby leaned forward. What are you proposing? Thaddeus smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I'm proposing we set a trap. We let Lowell think he's won. We let him think Maeve is giving up handing over Hazel walking away from Oak Street. And when he comes to collect, we make sure the authorities are waiting. Maeve's pulse quickened. You want to use Hazel as bait? I want to use the situation as bait, Thaddeus corrected. Hazel will be safe. I'll make sure of it. But Lowell needs to believe he's getting what he wants. Otherwise, he'll just keep escalating. Alistair spoke for the first time, his voice weak but clear. It's risky. Everything worth doing is risky, Thaddeus said. She looked at Maeve. But it's your decision. I can't make it for you. Maeve looked around the table, at Alistair, who had spent 22 years waiting to keep a promise, at Hazel, who was barely more than a girl, and already carrying the weight of a terrible choice, at Silas, who had lost his wife and was determined not to lose anyone else. And she thought of her mother's letter. Protect yourself from those who don't deserve your compassion. We do it, Maeve said. But I have one condition. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. What's that? I'm not hiding in the background, Maeve said. If we're setting a trap, I'm the one who springs it. Thaddeus studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, let's get to work. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. Maeve would reach out to Lowell and tell him she was ready to negotiate. She would offer to let Hazel go to step back from Oak Street in exchange for Lowell leaving the ranch alone. They would arrange a meeting somewhere public enough to seem safe, but isolated enough for Lowell to feel in control. And when Lowell arrived, the Sheriff Tom Briggs and 2 deputies would be waiting in unmarked cars ready to move in. The moment Lowell made a move that crossed the line from negotiation to coercion. It was not foolproof. Lowell was too smart to incriminate himself outright. But Thaddeus believed that his arrogance would trip him up, that he would say something or do something that could be used against him. Maeve was not as confident, but she did not have a better plan. She made the call on a Friday afternoon, standing in the kitchen of Oak Street, her hands shaking as she dialed the number Barnaby had dug up from his contacts. Lowell answered on the second ring. Mrs. Holloway, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I want to meet, Maeve said, keeping her voice steady, to discuss terms. Terms, Lowell repeated, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I'm listening. Not over the phone. In person. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the old grain silo off Route 87. You know the place. I know it. Come alone, Maeve said. I'll do the same. Lowell chuckled. You think I'm stupid enough to fall for that? I think you're smart enough to know that if anything happens to me, there are people who will make sure you pay for it, Maeve said. So come alone or don't come at all. There was a pause. Then Lowell said, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. Maeve set the phone down and realized she was shaking. Silas, who had been standing in the doorway, crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, I do. Maeve replied, her voice muffled against his chest. Then I'm coming with you. No. Lowell will expect that. He'll bring men if I bring you. Silas pulled back and looked at her, his jaw tight. I don't like this. Neither do I, Maeve said. But it's the only way. The next day passed in a haze of preparation. Thaddeus walked Maeve through what to say, how to respond, how to keep Lowell talking long enough for him to incriminate himself. Sheriff Briggs went over the plan with his deputies, marking positions on a map, coordinating timing, making sure everyone knew their role. Alistair watched it all from his bed, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp. That afternoon, he called Maeve into the study and asked her to close the door. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair beside the bed. Maeve sat, and Alistair reached under his pillow and pulled out a small leather pouch. He handed it to her. What is this? Maeve asked. Open it. Maeve loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. It was a ring old and simple, made of gold, worn smooth with age. Engraved on the inside were two initials, A.D. and I.H., Alistair and Iris. Maeve's throat tightened. Al, I can't take this. You can and you will, Alistair said. I had it made after she died. I never wore it, but I want you to have it now. Not to wear, but to carry. As a reminder that you come from strong people. People who loved fiercely and fought hard and kept their promises even when it cost them everything. Maeve closed her hand around the ring, feeling the weight of it, the history. Thank you. Alistair took her other hand, his grip fragile. Maeve, listen to me. I'm not going to live much longer. Days, maybe a week. The doctors were clear about that. But I need to know that you're going to be all right. That you're going to finish what we started. I will. Maeve said, tears streaming down her face. I promise. Good? Alistair whispered. He closed his eyes, and for a moment Maeve thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke again, his voice so soft she had to lean in to hear. Your mother would be so proud of you. I hope you know that. Maeve kissed his forehead. I know. The old grain silo stood at the edge of an empty field, a rusted monument to a time when Cedar Springs had been a thriving agricultural hub. The structure was 3 stories tall, its metal skin pocked with holes, its roof sagging under the weight of decades. The road that led to it was dirt and gravel overgrown with weeds rarely traveled except by teenagers looking for a place to drink. or vandals looking for a place to spray paint their initials. Maeve arrived at 6:45, driving her truck slowly down the rutted road, her headlights cutting through the gathering dark. She parked 50 feet from the silo and killed the engine. The silence that followed was total, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant cry of a hawk. She sat in the truck for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. In her pocket, she carried Alistair's ring. In the glove compartment, she had a small voice recorder that Thaddeus had given her, already running, already capturing every sound. At 6:55, another vehicle appeared on the road. A black SUV with tinted windows moving slowly, deliberately. It stopped 20 feet from Maeve's truck, and the driver's side door opened. Lowell Cade stepped out. He was alone as far as Maeve could see. Though she knew there could be men in the SUV, men hidden in the trees, men waiting in the shadows, Lowell walked toward her truck, his hands in the pockets of his long coat, his expression calm. Maeve opened her door and stepped out. The cold air hit her like a slap, and she pulled her jacket tighter around herself. "Mrs. Holloway," Lowell said, stopping 10 feet away. "Punctual. I appreciate that." "Let's get this over with," Maeve said. Lowell smiled. "Straight to business. I like that too. So tell me, what are you offering?" "I'll let Hazel go," Maeve said. "I'll tell her to leave Cedar Springs to go back to her family or wherever she wants. I won't interfere with your family's claim to the baby. And in return, you leave me alone. You leave the ranch alone. You call off whatever you're planning next." Lowell cocked his head, considering. "That's a reasonable offer. But I have a counter-proposal." "I'm listening." "You give me the house on Oak Street," Lowell said. "You sign the deed over to me free and clear. In return, I'll forgive the $50,000 Garrett Finch owes me. And I'll make sure nothing else unfortunate happens to you or your friends." Maeve's blood ran cold. "Oak Street isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mrs. Holloway. It's just a matter of price." "No." Lowell's smile faded. "Then we have a problem." "We don't have a problem," Maeve said, "because you're not getting Oak Street and you're not getting Hazel. And if you come near me or anyone I care about again, I'll make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of man you are." Lowell took a step closer, and Maeve forced herself to stand her ground. "You think you can threaten me. You think your little refuge and your crippled godfather give you power. You're nothing, Mrs. Holloway. You're a broke, abandoned woman playing house in a broken-down building. And if I want to take it from you, I will. Not if I stop you first," a voice said from the darkness. Maeve's heart leapt. She turned and saw Garrett Finch stepping out from behind the silo. His hands raised, his face pale in the dim light. Lowell's expression shifted surprise, flashing across his face before he schooled it back to calm. "Well, well, the prodigal debtor returns. I was wondering when you'd show up." "I'm here to settle my debt," Garrett said, his voice shaking. "But not the way you think." "Oh," Lowell said, amused. "And how do you plan to settle it?" Garrett reached into his jacket and Maeve's breath caught. For a terrible second she thought he was reaching for a gun. But when his hand emerged, it held a thick envelope. "I'm giving you this," Garrett said, walking forward slowly. "It's a signed confession. Everything you've done. The loans, the threats, the fire. I wrote it all down and I signed it in front of a notary. If anything happens to me or to Maeve or to anyone at that ranch, this goes straight to the FBI. Lowell's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Try me, Garrett said. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, rattling the metal skin of the silo, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Then Lowell laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. You think a piece of paper scares me? You think your word means anything? You're a junkie and a thief, Finch. No one will believe you. One will. Maybe not, Garrett said. But they'll investigate. And once they start digging, they'll find things. Things you thought you buried deep enough. Lowell's hand moved toward his coat, and Maeve saw the glint of metal. A gun. Garrett, run! She screamed. But Garrett did not run. He lunged forward, tackling Lowell around the waist, and the two men went down in a tangle of limbs. The gun went off a sharp crack that echoed across the empty field, and Maeve screamed. Headlights blazed to life from the tree line. Sheriff Briggs's voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the sheriff. Drop your weapon and get on the ground. Two deputies burst from the trees, guns drawn, shouting commands. Lowell scrambled to his feet, his gun still in his hand, and for a split second Maeve thought he would fire. But then he saw the deputies, saw the sheriff advancing, and he dropped the gun and raised his hands. Maeve ran to Garrett, who lay on the ground clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and spreading. No, 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 Maeve whispered, falling to her knees beside him. Garrett, stay with me. Garrett's eyes found hers, and he smiled faintly. I'm sorry, Maeve, for everything. I couldn't save my mom, but maybe I saved you. You did, Maeve said, tears streaming down her face. You did, Garrett. Just hold on, okay? Help is coming. But Garrett's eyes were already closing. His hand slipped from his chest, and the blood flowed faster. Garrett, Maeve screamed. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. Lowell Cade was arrested that night and charged with attempted murder, arson, and a dozen other counts that Thaddeus Grimm had been building in the background. His son, Connor, was arrested 3 days later on charges of sexual assault after Hazel gave a statement to the district attorney. The trial took 6 months. But in the end, Lowell was sentenced to 25 years in a federal prison. Connor received 8. Maeve did not attend the sentencing. She had already said goodbye to that chapter of her life. Alastair Donovan passed away on the morning of March 14th, just as the first wildflowers began to bloom in the fields around Copper Ridge Ranch. He died in his sleep, his face peaceful, his hands folded over the journal he had been writing in for 22 years. On the last page, in handwriting that trembled but did not falter, he had written, March 13th, 2019. My dearest Iris, I kept my promise. Our girl is safe. Our girl is strong. I will see you soon, my love. Wait for me. The funeral was held on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of day that made you believe winter was finally over. 200 people came filling the small church in Cedar Springs to capacity and spilling out onto the lawn. Ranchers and lawyers, old friends and new people whose lives Alastair had touched in ways both large and small. Maeve stood at the pulpit and read the eulogy she had written in the quiet hours of the morning. Her voice shook. But she did not cry. Not yet. Alistair Donovan was not my father by blood, she said. But he was my father by choice, and that is a bond stronger than anything biology can create. He taught me that promises matter, that love endures, that mercy is not weakness, but it must be tempered with wisdom. He taught me that a home is not a place. It's the people who wait for you, the people who make room at the table, the people who say, "You belong here," and mean it. She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. My mother asked him to wait for me, and he did, for 22 years. And when I finally came home, he was there, just like he promised. Her voice broke on the last word, and she stepped down from the pulpit. Silas was waiting at the bottom of the steps, and he took her hand and did not let go. They buried Alistair beside Iris in the Cedar Springs Cemetery, under the shade of a live oak that had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. The headstone was simple, just his name and the dates and the words Maeve had chosen. He kept his word. After the service, Maeve returned to the ranch. Opal had prepared a meal, and the house was filled with people eating and talking and sharing stories about the man who had brought them all together. Maeve moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting condolences, thanking people for coming, feeling like she was watching herself from a great distance. It was not until late that night, when everyone had gone and the house was quiet, that she allowed herself to break. She went into the study, now empty except for the desk and the bookshelves, and she sat in Alistair's chair and wept. Silas found her there an hour later. He did not say anything. He simply sat on the floor beside the chair and rested his hand on her knee, and they stayed like that until the tears finally stopped. 6 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and summer turned to the first cool days of autumn. Maeve threw herself into the work of the ranch and the refuge, and slowly the shape of a new life began to emerge. Oak Street was officially registered as Grace's Haven, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing shelter and support to women escaping abuse, poverty, and homelessness. Thaddeus Grimm had handled the paperwork pro bono, and Barnaby had used his connections to secure grants and donations. The first full-time resident was Hazel, who had given birth to a healthy baby girl in April, and named her Iris. Hazel enrolled in community college and studied to become a nurse, and in the evenings she rocked her daughter to sleep and sang lullabies in a voice that was growing stronger every day. 2 more women arrived in June and 3 more in August. By September, every room in Oak Street was full, and Maeve was already looking at properties nearby, thinking about expansion. The ranch, too, had changed. Opal still ran the kitchen, but she had help now from a rotating cast of women who had stayed at Grace's Haven and wanted to give back. Gus spent his days teaching woodworking to anyone who would listen, his hands steady despite the blindness his memory, a library of skills he was determined to pass on. Connie sewed quilts for the babies born at the refuge, each one a work of art. Fletch told jokes that still did not quite land, but made people smile anyway. Eudora tended her garden and brewed teas for anyone who needed them. Barnaby handled the legal work and watched over them all with the fierce protectiveness of a man who had spent his career defending the defenseless. And Maeve held it all together, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because this was the promise she had made to Alistair, and to her mother and to herself. Silas had become a fixture at the ranch, showing up most evenings after his rounds to help with repairs or play with Wren in the yard. He and Maeve had not defined what they were to each other. They did not need to. They simply existed in each other's orbit, two people who had been broken and were learning slowly how to be whole again. One evening in late September, as the sun set and the air cooled, Maeve sat on the porch of the ranch house, rocking slowly in Alistair's old chair. In her hands, she held the journal he had left behind, its pages filled with 22 years of letters to a woman he had loved and lost. She opened to a page at random and read, April 3rd, 2001. Dear Iris, today I saw a hummingbird at the feeder and I thought of you. You always loved the small things, the way light caught in a dewdrop, the sound of rain on the roof, the first bloom of spring. I hope wherever you are, there are hummingbirds. Maeve smiled, tears pricking her eyes, and closed the journal. She looked out at the ranch, at the fields stretching toward the horizon, at the barn they had rebuilt from the ashes, at the lights glowing in the windows of the house. She thought of her mother, who had loved fiercely and fought hard and left behind a legacy that had taken 2 years to fully bloom. She thought of Alistair, who had waited with a patience that bordered on the divine and had given Maeve not just a home, but a purpose. And she thought of Garrett, who had been broken and cruel and selfish, but who had in the end done one good thing, one act of redemption that had cost him everything. Maeve reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring Alistair had given her, the one engraved with his initials and Iris's. She slipped it onto her finger, not to wear forever, but to carry for now. A reminder. Silas came up the steps, Wren riding on his shoulders, and the little girl laughed, the sound bright and pure. Silas set her down, and Wren ran to Maeve, climbing into her lap and nestling against her chest. Tell me a story, Wren said. Maeve kissed the top of her head. What kind of story? A happy one. Maeve thought for a moment. Then she said, Once upon a time there was a woman who thought she had lost everything. But she found a place where people waited for her, even when she didn't know they were waiting. And she learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's the people you choose back. Wren sighed content and closed her eyes. Silas sat on the porch swing beside the rocking chair, and Maeve reached out and took his hand. Together they watched the stars come out one by one until the sky was full of light. And in the quiet of that moment, Maeve felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Inside the house, Opal began to hum an old hymn, and the sound drifted out through the open windows, carried on the evening breeze. In the fields, the cattle lowed softly, settling in for the night. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, a sound both lonely and full of belonging. Maeve looked down at the ring on her finger, at the initials worn smooth by time, and she whispered the words she had been too afraid to say aloud for so long. I'm home. And she was. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. There would always be women who needed help. Always battles to fight. Always moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. But Maeve knew now that she did not have to carry it alone. She had Silas and Wren. She had Opal and Gus and Connie and Fletch and Eudora and Barnaby. She had Hazel and Iris and the women who would come after them, each one adding a thread to the tapestry that Alistair had begun weaving 22 years ago. And she had the memory of her mother, and the memory of the man who had loved her mother with a devotion that transcended time and death, and every obstacle the world had thrown in his path. Maeve stood Wren still cradled in her arms and carried the sleepy child inside. She tucked her into the small bed in the guest room, the room that had once been Maeve's when she first arrived, scared and alone, and certain that she would never belong anywhere. She kissed Wren's forehead and turned out the light, leaving the door open just a crack, so the child would not wake in the dark and feel afraid. In the hallway, Silas was waiting. He did not say anything. He simply held out his hand, and Maeve took it, and together they walked downstairs. The house was quiet now. The others already in their rooms, the day's work done. Maeve and Silas sat on the couch in the living room, the fire burning low in the hearth, and for a long time they did not speak. Finally, Silas said, "You did good today. So did you." "I mean it, Maeve. What you've built here, what you're building, it matters. Alistair knew that. Your mother knew that. And I hope you know it too." Maeve leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm starting to." "Good," Silas said. He kissed the top of her head, and they sat like that until the fire burned down to embers and the house grew cold. When they finally stood to go to bed, Maeve paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at the living room, at the empty rocking chair where Alistair used to sit, at the place on the mantel where his journal now rested, at the photographs on the wall of people who had come and gone and left their mark on this place. She thought of the words her mother had written in the last letter, the one meant for when Maeve became a mother herself, the letter she had finally opened last week. "My darling girl, if you are reading this, it means you have found the strength to build something beautiful from the wreckage life handed you. It means you have learned what I learned too late, that love is not about holding on to what you have. It is about opening your hands and letting others in. Be brave, my Maeve. Be kind. And know that I am with you always, in every act of grace, in every moment of courage, in every choice you make, to stand up and say, this is who I am, and this is what I will fight for. I love you. I have always loved you, and I am so very proud." Maeve climbed the stairs, Silas behind her, and when she reached the top, she looked out the window at the dark expanse of land that stretched toward the horizon. She thought of Alistair sitting on the porch for 22 years waiting, and she thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, extracting a promise from the man she had loved and lost. And she understood finally that the promise had not been just about protecting Maeve. It had been about creating a legacy, about ensuring that the love Iris had felt, the love she had not been able to fully express in life, would live on in the lives of others. Maeve was that legacy, and Grace's haven was the proof. She climbed into bed, exhausted but content, and closed her eyes. And as she drifted off to sleep, she felt just for a moment the warmth of a hand on her forehead, the way her mother used to touch her when she was small and scared and needed comfort. She smiled and slept. The next morning, Maeve woke before dawn and went downstairs to help Opal with breakfast. The kitchen was warm. The coffee was strong, and the house smelled of bacon and fresh biscuits. One by one, the others came down sleepy and quiet, and took their places at the table. It was an ordinary morning, the kind of morning that happens 1,000 times over the course of a life unremarkable and easy to forget. But Maeve did not forget. She looked around the table at the faces of the people she had chosen, and who had chosen her, and she felt a gratitude so deep it threatened to overwhelm her. This was home. This was family. This was the promise kept. And it was enough.